Hello and welcome back to Jazz After Dark. Missed you guys. I finally got the cap off, by the way. How's everybody doing? Welcome. Actually, I can't get the cap back in, so it's just what it is. I am happy to be back with you guys here after attending a pretty cool little conference for financial advisors. Learned a lot about people that I didn't know much about. I never really followed financial advisors, so hang out, have a drink with me tonight because we're going to actually talk about not financial advisors. Getting a lot of questions on the debt ceiling. Naturally, right? That's the hot topic right now. And so I realize there's a lot of misinformation. I won't even say that, just a lack of understanding of how this works. So I'm going to explain it. I've seen it before, of course. A lot of you have. I'm getting that age, man. I've been through some things, man, especially with Eric at a conference. Woo! Uses a lot of words. Anyways, so I'm going to go through some of the emails of questions that I got. I'm going to respond to them. But basically what's happening here is, if you do basic elementary discussion of the debt ceiling, Congress has to approve not only spending, but they have to approve the issuance of debt. And so what they did is they said, well, if we're going to issue debt, we have to. We can't operate as a country without issuing debt. Agree or disagree. I'm not going to take the political approach tonight. I'm going to give you the elementary school version of how this works. So what they did is they said, let's just set a ceiling. We think we're going to spend about this much in issuing new debt. So let's set the ceiling, and that way we don't have to vote every time this happens. So they set this number. And then they go about their year and they vote on other stuff and this happens. Well, inevitably, we'll get close to it. We don't always hit it. Lately, we have, and I say lately like 25 years. But if they're hit the limit, well, all that means is that we need to issue more debt. We got the number wrong for some reason. And maybe it's poor spending, which we all agree, or just something caused it to hit the ceiling. And so the reason that we have to raise the ceiling is because they have to issue more debt. So they say, well, if we raise it a little bit, then we can continue funding our debt and making our payments and Social Security and Medicare and things like that. And so that's why they have this debate. Now, sadly, it's become a political tool because no matter who's in the White House or who's controlling the White House, the D's or the R's, the other side wants to make it look like they're fighting to cut spending. Then, the other side takes over. They're in the White House and they have the same argument. And so they sadly use it as a political tool. Well, this gets into a lot of questions now about how that affects our debt rating around the world, which means maybe other countries won't want to hold the dollar if they know that it's not as stable, and the securities that the bonds that we offer, maybe there's a risk of default there. And so this becomes an issue. However, there's a lot of headlines that cause you to think one thing when in reality it doesn't work like that. I mean, you can even read it yourself if you want to go through all of that, if you want to look through the CFR. So the other question, and I'll just get into questions here. The one question, I guess, is popular. I haven't seen this on TV or anything, but I guess some lawmakers are calling for to just abolish the debt ceiling. And this is easy to do if you're not necessarily in Congress. So there's the concept here is, well, if we're always going to fight about this, like in 2011, huge political divide. And so they ran this to the last second sort of thing, and we're going to default. So the argument is, well, the president has the authority to just get rid of the debt ceiling. No president or Congress member wants to be responsible for that. And I wouldn't either, whether I was a politician or I guess I'd have to be. I wouldn't want that either. So the argument is, well, why don't we just say we got the number on the debt ceiling wrong, raise it to like a 400 quadrillion, some weird number that we would never hit anyways. Well, they won't do that, and it's not going to happen, by the way, because no side wants to be responsible for it. Well, we raised it to 400 quadrillion, and turns out we spent 6 trillion, or some crazy number. That's obviously disastrous. So that's not something that's going to happen. Now, the questions that I've gotten, I guess I could just read through them, but I'm kind of summarizing. The questions that I've gotten are, why is it that they won't raise the debt ceiling? And it's political, of course, but the spending cuts are a part of it. And so what happens is, in this case, the Republicans are coming in and saying, we want spending cuts to be about 0.8% of GDP. And the White House is saying, we don't want any spending cuts. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat. This happened the last time too. Republicans said, we don't want any spending cuts. Democrats said, you have to have some spending cuts. It's kind of like that wall down in Mexico there. And so the discussion becomes, well, will you talk about spending cuts? We want 0.8% of GDP. And the White House says, we're not negotiating. No, sorry. Well, that's changed. So now the White House is saying, we'll talk about spending cuts. It's not going to be the 0.8%. It may end up being 0.2%, but we're willing to negotiate a little bit because the deadline is approaching. Republicans in this case are being, Democrats would do the same, but Republicans are sort of shooting for the moon here. And they're saying, we want you to even repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. Maybe not such a big problem there. It's not too bad. And we also want you to stop this whole paying off of student loan things. We want to end all of that talk off the table. And some of that will come and go as they negotiate. So then the question becomes, what happens if they don't reach a deal? So this is different than towards the end of the year, like end of September, where the government could shut down. The government won't shut down here. This is not that discussion. What would happen is if we pass presumably around my birthday is when they'll officially have about $30 billion left over, which is considered running out of money. What would happen is they know that we have Fitch, Moody's, and the S&P could downgrade credit rating. However, they have all said that the downgrade of the U.S. Credit rating is based on their debt service. So the way this would go is if there's a default, somebody asked me the question, how would these payments actually work out? What's getting cut and everything if this is done? And so what I said is they'll likely follow what happened in 2011. And so the way we did this was we used the available debt, which is not much, about $30 billion, which, it's a lot, but not for the government. They would use that to pay just the debt. We'd shut off all payments, but we'd pay the debt, and they will it's guaranteed they'll do that. And so therefore, there can't be a debt downgrade or a credit rating downgrade. And then what happens is they have tax money coming in daily. Well, they would wait for enough money to come in from tax receipts in order to pay for 1 day's worth of non-debt related stuff. And then they would make that payment, and then they would wait for more of it to come in, and then they would make that payment towards that. So that would allow them to continue to pay their interest payments on debt, which is fine. That's acceptable for the credit rating agencies. They wouldn't be able to make principal payments or no other payments as well. And so they would also, it gets a little fancy, but they would roll out some of their treasuries that they have, and that would come at a cost and things like that. But so that's how that would work in order to not have a downgrade, because inevitably one of the questions is, do you think the credit rating will get downgraded? It is not impossible, but there's like a 5% chance that could happen because they will continue to pay their debts. Everybody else won't get paid, but that's what will happen. So that's that part. If we look at, let's say we hit the deadline, which is somewhere in June. The thing to note here is that the debt payments don't actually happen in June. So even if we hit the debt ceiling, we're not really in trouble until July. That's when the payments would pick up. And so really June is kind of a wash. It's just a date. And so we're really looking at July and of course going forward from there. So you say, well, would they extend the deadline to come up with a deal? No, not necessarily. A couple weeks ago, that would have been a good thing that they could have done. They might have said, well, we can't come to any agreement. We're going to extend the deadline. And what would have happened is they would have extended it all the way till when the government would need to shut down, which I believe is end of September. I don't know if September has 30 days or 31, but that last day of September. And if at that point they didn't have a deal, the government would start to shut down. We've seen that. You probably lived through some of that. That's not going to happen this time. They're going to come up with or agree to a deal on the debt ceiling. I give it like less than 10% chance that they won't actually come up with something. They're not going to do that. We certainly could say, let's, extend it and everything, but that time has passed. So that's not something that's possible. So any deal that is reached will take us through the end of the year and into 2024. So this will be behind us, right? So that's how that part works. The other question that I get is, how does this affect the market, right? Well, you see that effect right now, and in the very, very short term, and I'm not sugarcoating this or trying to make this sound like it's not a big deal. I'm just having a drink, hanging out with you guys. So, in the short term, yes, volatility will increase. Now, I've shared that with you guys before, how that's already priced in. So it's not that you can do something about it or play along now. Volatility is already priced in. It is expected that this was going to happen. So, and you see it in the market's performance. The bond market's a different scenario. And I don't know how many of you are interested in the bond market, but why would somebody have a short-term note or short-term treasury right now when there's a chance that the premium may not get paid out on that, especially really short-term? And so the really short-term bond market is priced at a discount, meaning you're getting a bigger return. You're paying less for the bond, but you're getting a bigger return because there's more risk in there. And there's the chance you don't get paid at all. So that's really the area of the market, or if you want to say it that way, that's kind of in trouble right there. Anyways, just kind of sharing a few things there. Stock market wise, we have the day-to-day mess. The bond market's really kind of where the chaos is hit there. But now you know how this all works and why. I had people asking me, why is there no talk of a shutdown? This is not that discussion. This is the debt ceiling discussion there. The other thing I want to point out is, if they were to, remember I mentioned a minute ago, raise it to $400 quadrillion. What if they just get rid of the debt ceiling? We don't put a number on it, but we just say the government just issues debt. This takes you back to like high school's civics class, or high school, or maybe even college American government class. The Congress has to vote each time they issue debt. How often do we issue debt in the U.S.? Twice a week. I don't know if you knew that, but there is a bond auction to raise debt for the United States twice a week. And often if you watch TV, they'll cover it or something along there. So imagine that. Congress would have to vote twice a week, like not they got other things to do, but they would have to vote on the issuance of new debt 2 times a week. That's impossible. There's just no way. They're not going to do that. And that's why you don't see them just say, well, let's get rid of the debt ceiling, right? Originally, this was put in place because it was like, okay, we need to put a cap on this. We need to understand what our spending is. Now it's political and everything, but the law is still the law. Congress has to vote on it. Now, they could certainly say, we're going to abolish the debt ceiling, and we are not going to need to vote on issuing new debt. Now we're changing the Constitution. So you see how, from a legal standpoint, some people don't believe in the Constitution anymore, and there's weird stuff happening there, but you just can't do that. There's no telling how that would even be brought up as a case. So debt ceiling is a good thing. It is unfortunately created this political divide, and I would mention that Moody's actually said that they view this just like 2011. So they were trying to talk tough. But they're saying, we will downgrade you guys. No worries at all. We will downgrade you if you don't service your debt. Now, if you guys want to bicker and just be politicians, we think that's horrible for the future of the credit rating of the United States as a whole, but that doesn't impact our decision at the moment. So that political divide is something they're really worried about there. And that's their way, like, when the Fed talks tough about inflation, it's the same thing there. So not the most exciting class, but I think lessons to be learned there. And now, hopefully, you can look at a headline and say, I understand why they put the headline like that, because it's serious business. But at the end of the day, if you see a headline that says abolish the debt ceiling, or the government's not going to pay its debt, no, the Treasury's already laid out their plan. They've been through this, right? 2011, 2013. They have a plan in place for that, and I've outlined that for you guys here. So a fun amount of chaos that's talked about on TV and in financial media, but it all boils down to how do the nuts and bolts of this work? And then if you know how it works, you know which headlines are sort of fear and which ones are maybe, you know, an algorithm or AI writing it that doesn't really know the Constitution. So now you guys are a little more educated there. I hope that helped you out. And if you'd like to expand on that more, I know there were a few things that I said, yeah, it's not really something we talk about, but I certainly can. I enjoy talking about it, especially when you have clients that say, this is what's going to happen. And you go, no, not unless they get rid of the Constitution. So that's not possible. That's a talking point for the moment, a sad one, but that's what it is. Well, I thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will do the same. Glad to be back. We'll see you guys soon. Enjoy.